Welcome to the Bitcoin Source podcast, where we dive deep into the world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I'm your host, Daru, and today we have a very special guest with us, Leon Wankum, a seasoned hodler who actively involves himself in real estate and venture capitalism, and who specializes in helping real estate investors incorporate Bitcoin into their strategies. Leon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Leon, I want to start things off kind of taking us back in your history, getting into real estate, getting into Bitcoin. So, back in 2012, how did a discussion on von Mises lead you to the world of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I have to be honest with you. I actually learned about Bitcoin and von Mises at the same time, but it took me some time to connect the dots. So I studied philosophy and ethics, and during my studies, I engaged with Greek philosophy mainly, and then Eastern philosophy, so Zen Buddhism and the philosophy behind yoga. And I also learned about Austrian economics. And then at the same time, a lot of the students were using a very particular website at the time where you had to pay with Bitcoin. And I was standing behind a friend of mine in his room, and he was paying with Bitcoin on this website. And that was the first time that I encountered Bitcoin. And I didn't even ask what Bitcoin was. I just asked him how he paid for the product. And he said, "Oh, I just paid with internet money." And at the time, I just thought, that's brilliant because I questioned anyway why there was no native currency in the internet. So I just took Bitcoin for granted and we just started using it to pay for goods and services, so to say. And then 3 years later, I did my master's degree in financial economics, and I went deep into the rabbit hole of Austrian economics, and I learned about von Mises. And I want to read something actually that I looked into my master thesis before our podcast, and I read a quote. I want to quote something from my master thesis because it kind of explains why I understood Bitcoin through the lens of Austrian economics, or the positive implications that Bitcoin could have on society. So I'll start reading. Ludwig von Mises believed that society must be carried on everyone's shoulders. People don't need to be told what to do, but raised to be independent, educated individuals making conscious decisions for themselves. Tight state control and radically enforced community awareness is destined to fail. For that reason, everyone must engage himself into the intellectual. No one can refrain from doing so, as the interest of everyone hangs on the results. Whether we want to or not, we are all part of the great historical struggle to create a society worth living in. So when I read that, I just understood that I need to get involved with Bitcoin. I always liked counter economics, and that resonated with me so much. I mean, you can see the biggest communist empire, the Soviet Union, collapsed in 1991. So forced intellectualism and community and such things, they don't work. And Mises really allowed me to understand the importance of the individual. And Bitcoin empowers the individual. And that made me become really interested in Bitcoin. So it was really a 3-year journey where Mises and Bitcoin came into my life studying philosophy and ethics, but I didn't connect the dots. And it took me 3 years to connect the dots. And then it took me, I say, another 5 years to connect a lot of other dots that made me who I am today, working both in Bitcoin and real estate and venture capital. So it's been a long journey, and I'm continually learning.
Yeah, Mises for me, I actually discovered Mises from your friend Leon, that's the founder of Bitcoin News, and
Yeah.
we were talking about Austrian economics, and I never heard of him before, and he was raving about him so much that I ended up grabbing one of the books, reading it, and it's a lot. The Austrian economics model is kind of difficult for some people because we're so used to traditional economics, fiat currency, debasement, just the way that they've structured the way our financial system is set up. When you read Mises, it's like an aha moment for you. It's like it
Yeah.
opens up your brain to these new possibilities of like how money is actually supposed to work. So I was just curious to hear kind of your background story and how that really opened up your ideas to Bitcoin, real estate, and just investing as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. I really learned through the lens of philosophy and ethics about Bitcoin. And then I went down the rabbit hole also through Rothbard and through reading Hayek to understand what was the gold standard, what's the fiat system, why do we need Bitcoin. So when I started using Bitcoin, I didn't even understand that money should be a store of value. I just thought money is a medium of exchange because that's what we're told, right? And then through reading also The Theory of Money and Credit, which is a book by Mises, where he clearly explains that money needs to be a good store of value, to be a good medium of exchange, because why would anybody accept money that is a bad store of value for any product or service, right? But through our education system, we've been sort of forced to believe that money is only a medium of exchange. Like it's this culture of consumerism. And Bitcoin really changes that. And I agree with what you said. You know, when you read Austrian economics, it's like so eye opening. It's crazy. It's like almost like a religious revelation or something like that.
In today's fast paced digital world, showing your support for the things you love doesn't have to break the bank. With just a few seconds of your time, you can help us at the Bitcoin Source by liking our content, subscribing to our channel, pressing the notification bell, and leaving a comment with your thoughts. Every interaction helps us to grow and improve, and we are grateful for your support. So if you are a fan of our content, take a moment to show your love and help us to continue to deliver high quality, informative content about Bitcoin and the world of cryptocurrency. Your support means the world to us, and we can't thank you enough for being a part of the Bitcoin Source community. Now back to the episode. Yeah, under a Bitcoin standard, housing will eventually collapse to its utility value. I remember seeing you tweet about that recently. So, real estate and Bitcoin are both considered stores of value assets to some degree. How do you advise real estate investors to approach Bitcoin, especially given the market's volatility?
Good question. Maybe I'll start by saying that I don't necessarily advise other people. We are a real estate development company. We're a family-owned business. And I built a strategy. So the articles that I publish, those are basically strategies that I worked out for our business. And then I started sharing them with the world to sort of open source my ideas, get constructive feedback, and also give other people the opportunity to learn through what I've learned potentially. And the way that I see it, money has been broken for so long that certain characteristics of money have been taken over by other assets. And two very important functions of money are the store of value function, historically, and also the function of collateral. Under a gold standard, people just saved in gold. And when they needed a credit, they used their gold as collateral to incur debt to then invest or consume or become productive. But because money has been broken for so long, it is a bad store of value and it can't be used as collateral. Both of these functions have been taken over by real estate. Since 1971, when Nixon went off the gold standard, real estate prices around the world, they have skyrocketed like crazy because people just use it as a savings account, right? And people also use real estate as collateral to incur debt. Both of these functions in the future, I believe, will likely be taken over by Bitcoin as great and good money. So by being an actual store of value, over time, the monetary premium that sits in real estate will most likely flow into Bitcoin, which will make housing affordable, as you said. But if you are in the real estate business, you need to hold Bitcoin on your balance sheet in order to position yourself for the digitalization of value. Because the way that real estate works, if you look at the real estate balance sheet, on one side, we have the liability side, which is basically debt. If you own real estate, you usually bought it through debt, right? So people that own real estate are highly indebted. And as interest rates are rising, the liability side of your balance sheet is growing. Now, on the other side, we have real estate. We have cash flow and producing assets. But the problem here is the following. Real estate is currently going down in value. As interest rates are going up, there's less new money entering the market and there's less new money entering the real estate business. At the same time, inflation causes construction costs to go up and profit margins are being squeezed. And in the future, potentially, this is going to continue as interest rates are likely to stay high for the foreseeable future. And Bitcoin now as this near perfect store of value will absorb the monetary premium that real estate has. So as a real estate developer or as an investor, you need to get Bitcoin on your balance sheet, basically. And the way I would approach it personally, there are four things that real estate developers can do. Number one, that's very obvious. You could potentially sell real estate and put that money into Bitcoin, but that's not so easy because usually real estate has been bought through debt and Bitcoin does not generate cash flow to pay back interest rates. So what I also suggest is if you sell real estate, or if you make profits, take some of those profits, put them into Bitcoin. And secondly, use your rental income to accumulate Bitcoin. Use Bitcoin to build maintenance reserves, because in the future, we will be forced to modernize our property, of course. And the inflationary pressures will cause cost to skyrocket. And Bitcoin, as disinflationary money, allows you, through the effect of deflation, to have the purchasing power to keep your property intact. And then the fourth thing, and of course, I was inspired by Michael Saylor, you can very well use real estate as collateral to incur debt to then buy Bitcoin. And you could potentially also refinance your real estate, and with the money that you get, buy Bitcoin. So I believe as a real estate developer, because I just want to point out that we are real estate developers. So we don't just buy real estate to store value. We are providing a service to the market, which is housing. So we buy properties, we build the houses, we own the houses, and then we rent it out. And I believe it's of paramount importance for entrepreneurs in the private sector to provide housing to the market, because everybody that has been in the Soviet Union knows that states are not very good at planning or providing houses, right? So, in order to stay competitive, in order to survive, and to continue to provide housing to the market, which I believe is important, we are accumulating Bitcoin on our balance sheet through these strategies that I just explained.
Yes. And Leon, given your expertise in real estate, how do you envision the future interplay between real estate transactions and Bitcoin? Do you see a day where properties are routinely bought and sold in Bitcoin, for example?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot. So, first of all, what I believe what's going to happen in the future, because Bitcoin is potentially pristine collateral if you can hold your keys, I believe that people will own Bitcoin to store value, and they will lend against the Bitcoin and then buy housing. So right now people own real estate, they lend against real estate and then buy goods and services. I think in the future you'd never want to sell your Bitcoin eventually, right? That's what we Bitcoiners understand. But we need a place to stay. So what I believe is very interesting is the ability to lend against your Bitcoin to then buy housing for yourself. So that is a very interesting intersection between Bitcoin and real estate that I'm particularly interested in. I could also imagine that people will pay for their real estate in Bitcoin, but I personally would not use my Bitcoin to buy a property. I would lend against my Bitcoin, then take the cash, and then rent or buy a home. That's how I believe that the intersection of Bitcoin and real estate will work. And obviously, the financialization of real estate will most likely stop, because Bitcoin, as a near perfect store of value, it allows us to save by default. So we don't need to invest our money in real estate, which will collapse to its utility value. So all the jobs right now, like real estate agents and all these things that like exist around real estate, I think they will most likely become less important, and some of these jobs will literally like fade away.
Yes, and you're also active in the venture capitalist space, right? So how has the broader crypto ecosystem influenced VC investments and strategies in recent years, in your opinion?
Oh, a lot, a lot. I believe there's a few problems obviously of the fiat system. So one of the big problems is that goods that have a utility value, like real estate, they are used as a savings account, and that drives up the cost of living and makes it difficult for people to build wealth. Number two, because there's so much cheap money in the market, people just invest in companies that have no business model. It's almost like people invest in these companies, they're treated as, I call it hot potatoes, that are like handed around, and people just want to sell whatever they bought for a higher price, and they don't look into the productivity of the company. Is there a business model that's sustainable? Do we actually need that company? So Bitcoin allows you to save. You don't need to invest to build capital. So if you own Bitcoin, you only invest in companies that you believe will outperform the deflation of Bitcoin, or that will bring value to society. So if I look at my personal journey as, I'd say, as an investor, before Bitcoin, I invested in, stocks, ETFs, and all those things. What I do right now, I only save in Bitcoin. and I invest in very particular companies that I believe will add value to society, and I spend a lot of time on these companies. I look at them very carefully to make sure that I don't lose my money, because the opportunity cost of making a bad investment is losing the Bitcoin that I own, right? And the deflation in Bitcoin over the past 10 years was on average, I think, 190%. I mean, there are different numbers, but that is the number that you usually read on the internet. And very few companies will outperform Bitcoin. So I don't necessarily invest into, for example, Lightning companies to outperform Bitcoin. I do it because I believe it's my way of giving back to the Bitcoin ecosystem, to provide funders with capital. And overall, a Bitcoin standard will lead to investors making more conscious decisions, and that most likely also lead to more robust business models. Because if you think about also the volatility of Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin market, the ideas of entrepreneurs are constantly tested, and that makes companies more anti-fragile, like Bitcoin. You know, the companies that exist today, most of these companies, they live on government subsidies. Like, these companies don't have valuable business models, right? But under a Bitcoin standard or under a hard money standard, you need to be very careful, if you're a founder, to only go out there and found a company if you can really add value to society. And I believe that's amazing.
Given your background in philosophy and ethics, can you share your perspective on the ethical dimensions of Bitcoin? Are there moral arguments for or against its widespread adoption?
I have a lot of arguments that speak for its adoption. I'm just thinking about a negative one. And maybe a fast adoption of Bitcoin is not what we want. Maybe we want Bitcoin to slowly infiltrate, like the world, to almost like build this, because Bitcoin was designed to rise almost like this phoenix from the ashes. So as the fiat system eventually will crumble, the societal order will endure, because for the first time in history, we can save our productivity in an asset that is unconfiscatable, difficult to tax, right? So in the past, whenever a fiat currency went to hyperinflation, for example, in the Weimar Republic in Germany, where from 1918 till 1923, the German Reichsmark experienced, I think, inflation rates of 100,000% a year. Afterwards, there was no technology that people could use to save their productivity. And that, I think, gave the breeding ground for the hatred that sparked, the rise of the Nazis, the Second World War, and so forth. So I believe it's good if the Bitcoin adoption is slowly, so that society won't go through this negative phase like after the hyperinflation in Germany. And from an ethical point of view, Bitcoin is just good and ethical money. There's a lot of, I think Saifuddin Ammous talks about this a lot. He says Bitcoin is halal. And also from a Jewish perspective, Bitcoin is kosher. Why is Bitcoin kosher? In Judaism and in Islam, also in Christianity, it's not allowed to take interest on debt. Why is that the case? That is the case because in the past, the way that debt was handled was inhumane. Sometimes people were even enslaved if they were not able to pay back their debt, right? And Bitcoin is money that you don't need to ask interest rates for, because it's deflationary. If I lend you 10 Bitcoin and I want 10 Bitcoin back in 10 years, those 10 Bitcoin will most likely have increased in purchasing power through the deflation of Bitcoin. So I don't need to ask you for interest rate. That makes Bitcoin ethical from a religious perspective. And the way that the fiat system works right now, the creation of money dilutes the savings of everybody that acts rational, because a rational human being usually saves money in order to prepare for the future. But as new money enters the economy, existing units of money lose purchasing power, because the purchasing power of money is usually linked to the overall supply of money. And because Bitcoin cannot be arbitrarily inflated, it allows everyone to save the fruits of their labor, and they can't be inflated, basically. And that also gives the breeding ground for an ethical society, whereas the fiat system is based on theft, because inflation is theft, and that is the breeding ground for negative behavior. People usually call it capitalism, but it's actually not capitalism at all. It's actually the fiat system, right? That is problematic. And I think we as Bitcoiners, we should also always, sometimes we idolize Bitcoin and we believe Bitcoin is the solution to every problem there is. But at the end of the day, there's a competition between ideas, and Bitcoin is a certain idea. And there's no 100% certainty that Bitcoin will win, even though I believe that. And the way that I structure my business, Bitcoin has become so important that if Bitcoin fails, I fail. I don't believe that Bitcoin fails, but we need to also be very much aware that Bitcoin is not the solution to every problem. So we as the individual, we have to continually engage in an intellectual sort of journey to better ourselves, also to leave the fiat mindset behind, because the fiat mindset causes us to build a huge ego. And when we bring that ego into Bitcoin, we just get wrecked because of the volatility of Bitcoin. So I personally have experienced that, and I try to every day remind myself anew, Leon, there's no space for your ego in Bitcoin.
Yes. And I know a lot of people don't like to talk about future predictions, but with your experience spanning almost a decade in the Bitcoin world, where do you see Bitcoin in the next 10 years, especially in terms of its global economic impact?
Good question. I like that question because you didn't ask me about the price, because the price is something I don't know about, of course. Just as fiat has no bottom, Bitcoin has no top. It's going up forever as long as humanity is productive, basically, and we store that productivity in Bitcoin. I think what will happen next is that Bitcoin, and Saylor explains this very well. I think Bitcoin will infiltrate, quote unquote, all the financial products that are existing. So there will be Bitcoin ETFs. Funds will start allocating a certain percentage into Bitcoin. Companies will use Bitcoin to store productivity. So Bitcoin emerges as this prime treasury asset that everybody can use to protect their productivity from monetary inflation. And that includes individuals, which has already happened. I mean, Bitcoin so far has been mostly used by individuals. There are certain companies like Block and MicroStrategy, also Tesla, that have pioneered the use of Bitcoin on a corporate level. Now we've got these large financial firms like, BlackRock, Valkyrie, Fidelity, and so forth. So they will mix Bitcoin into all their products. And then what is also happening at the same time is that countries, of course, are adopting Bitcoin. At this point of time, it's easy for a country that does not have its own currency, like El Salvador, to adopt Bitcoin because they don't need to make any changes to the existing currency system because they don't have a currency system. So I believe going forward, it will be small countries that adopt Bitcoin first, but any country that has a liberal mindset is destined to also adopt Bitcoin as a reserve asset, because there's a historically any fiat currency has gone to zero, and the United States, I believe, cannot use gold to strengthen the currency because the Russians and the Chinese, they use gold. So if the US would now start buying a lot of gold, they would actually play into the hands of their rivals, so to say. So I could actually imagine that the US would also adopt Bitcoin at some point. But I also have to say, in its essence, I believe Bitcoin to be the separation of money and state. So I am less interested in driving Bitcoin adoption for countries. Other people do that, and I respect everybody. Everybody's doing their work within the Bitcoin ecosystem. But I'm personally interested in helping people, individuals, understand the benefits of Bitcoin, and companies especially. Because it also, Bitcoin forces us to make better decisions, right? Because like looking back at my Bitcoin journey is a journey of failures. I've lost Bitcoin. I made bad investment decisions where I should have kept the Bitcoin. And that over time has made me much more aware of my actions, both on a financial level, but also on a personal level. It forces a sort of financial discipline on everyone. And that is very helpful for companies to stay competitive and to create quality products.
Yes, and I kind of want to expound on that a little bit more, Leon, when you talked about how making those failures in the Bitcoin ecosystem kind of made you a better investor. How has Bitcoin influenced or changed your outlook on not only economics, but investments and the future of global finance in regards to the real estate market? Because I think the real estate market is changing so rapidly that keeping up with it as a Bitcoiner can be kind of challenging. So could you kind of explain a little bit how you navigate that kind of space?
Yes, sure. First of all, Bitcoin has made me aware of the negative implications of the real estate business. As I entered the real estate business, I was not aware of the Cantillon effect. So, for the listeners, the Cantillon effect basically describes that those that are closest to the money creation benefit the most from the creation of money. And I would consider real estate developers and investors to be those people, because the money that gets circled into the economy usually gets circled into the economy in the forms of loans that, for example, real estate investors then get, and then they buy property. For the individual real estate investor, that might be great, because then you just suddenly have a lot of capital and you have an asset that produces income. But for everybody else, it makes the cost of living more expensive, and it dilutes their savings. So Bitcoin has forced me to be critical with my own behavior and to question what I'm doing, which I'm very thankful for. And something I appreciate though about the real estate developers, and I'm the youngest in our company, so the partners are between 40 and 70. And these real estate guys are actually shorting the fiat system. They are anti-fiat. They just understood that real estate as an inflation hedge allows them to store value and short the fiat system, because they leverage by taking debt and fiat, buying an income producing asset. And as fiat decreases in value and their assets increase in value, they are shorting the fiat system. So it can be a very lucrative business, but you can also become bankrupt very quickly. So you have to be aware of interest rates. You have to fix your interest rates very long. I give you an example. If you have, for example, taken out a loan 2 years ago and you did not fix your interest rate, suddenly your interest rate cost has quadrupled. At the same time, rents not necessarily go up as fast as the cost of producing a house go up because of inflation. So now if the cost of your debt goes up, while at the same time your profit doesn't increase as fast, you basically get bankrupt. So there are a lot of strategies and like the way that real estate investors also observe the market, the way that they think about interest rates, macroeconomics, microeconomics, and also the longevity within the business. Because real estate developers, they don't develop real estate just to make a quick buck, but to develop real estate because they maybe want to provide for the next generation after them. They have a very long time horizon. And these are some qualities that have helped me and that I applied into my business ventures within the world of Bitcoin. Because what I believe Bitcoin to be is, it's just a store of value that just you need to hold in self custody. I don't lend out my Bitcoin. I'm not interested in trading it. I actually did all that, so I'm not criticizing anyone that's new to the space, because I've made all the mistakes that there are. But through living in both worlds, in the real estate world and the Bitcoin world, where you're constantly under a lot of pressure, and if you don't act carefully, you go bust very quickly. I've developed a very low time preference. So I know that whatever I do might only have benefits for me in 5 to 10 years, or might only benefit my children. But that has also allowed me to be more present in the moment, because when I left university, I was at such a high time preference. I wanted to, I don't know, like most young people. And Bitcoin has really allowed me to lower my time preference. And meditation has become part of my routine. I very carefully read the investment memorandum of the companies we invest in. I invest in very few companies, only companies that I 100% can align with, or in funds that I 100% believe to be working within the ethos of Bitcoin. And I take no bullshit. Like, if people try to sell me bullshit, I'm not interested. So I became also more sure in my character.
Yes, thank you, Leon. This Bitcoin conversation has been great. I really learned a lot about real estate. I learned a lot about your approach to investing, your journey into being orange pilled about Bitcoin. I hope my audience can learn a lot from you because I definitely did. But before we leave this conversation, Leon, can we get people to know more about your social media handles, websites, anything else that you want to tell people about your real estate investment firm?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me on the show. I also enjoyed our conversation. I hope I was able to provide some value to your listeners. If you want to follow me at Leon Wankum on Twitter, I write a newsletter called the Bitcoin Newsletter, which you can find on Substack. And I have a website called asystemofrules.org that you can visit, and I listed most of my publications there. And you can also find my articles in Bitcoin Magazine.
That's all the time that we have today. Thank you, Leon, for sharing your insights and expertise on how Bitcoin and real estate can coexist in an investment portfolio. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in, of course, to the Bitcoin Source podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this episode. And stay tuned for more fascinating discussions on the world of Bitcoin. Until next time, peace.